a screencast, another screencast where I'll be discussing specifically the cranial nerves here. So by the end of this, hopefully you should be able to identify and describe here the general structure of a nerve. Well, this is kind of a review. But then what do we mean by a mixed nerve and sensory nerve and a motor nerve? So mixed sensory and motor. And then specifically about the cranial nerves here. There are 12 of them. We're going to have you know 6 or 7 of those 12 in detail. Right? And so can we then describe major functions and the tests for cranial nerve 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, and I'm going to throw 9 in here. I don't know why I left that off. We'll throw 9 in there, and then 10. Okay? So just to review here, we're talking about nerves. So we're talking about the peripheral nervous system here. And there's going to be an afferent or sensory division and an efferent division or motor division. So the nerve itself is going to be in this area. And so it's going to, a nerve is going to have axons that are conducting sensory information toward the central nervous system, and then there will be axons in a nerve that will be conducting information away from the central nervous system to the periphery to some sort of effector. Right? So this, with this in mind, let's talk about the structure of a nerve. Then we've done this in class, also in previous screencasts, where a nerve is an organ. It's a collection of neurons and blood vessels wrapped in connective tissue. So going from outside to in, we have the epineurium, which is again a connective tissue layer, and then inside that epineurium are bundles of fascicles. So here we see a fascicle, and that fascicle is wrapped by another connective tissue layer called the perineurium. And then inside the fascicle are several dozen to 100 axons that are wrapped in a myelin sheath, right? And so this is what's making these white or white matter. And around each of those myelin sheaths is another connective tissue layer called the endoneurium. And the endoneurium is then separating the axons from one another. So now these axons could be solely sensory, in which case that nerve is conducting action potentials strictly to the central nervous system. These axons, so it could be sensory only. These axons could be motor or efferent only, or some of these axons could be sensory and motor. That is to say that if this one that I pulled out here was a sensory or afferent one, that this neuron right here, if I pulled that out, would have been motor or efferent, and not that this axon would be both sensory and motor. It's either sensory or motor, just like this one would be sensory or motor, but the whole overall nerve would contain both sensory and motor neurons next to one another, right? Or separated from one another, of course, by the connective tissue layer. Right? So this is what we mean by a sensory nerve, a motor nerve, or a mixed nerve. So if it contains sensory and motor, this is what we would call a mixed nerve. Okay. So the cranial nerves, there are 12 cranial nerves, and they innervate, and that is this word innervate. You'll hear me say this a lot here. Is that they? Another way to think of this is that they serve. They go to and from, conducting either afferent or efferent or both information. And so these cranial nerves innervate sensory receptors, right? Muscles and organs of the head, the neck, and selected thorax and abdomen. And so we want to focus here on, there are 12 of them, and we want to focus here on number 1, which is olfactory. So cranial nerve 1 is olfactory, and this is sensory only. So the color coding here, the blue is sensory only, is sensory, and then in this case the red is going to be motor. Right? And so olfactory is strictly sensory, right? Bringing, detecting smell, and then bringing that information to the brain. Number 2 is the optic, And this is, again, sensory only. So the optic nerve number, cranial nerve number 2, is bringing action potentials from the eye, receiving information from the eye. We want to contrast this optic one with oculomotor, which is number 3. So oculomotor describes exactly what's going on here. So motor, this is a motor-only nerve. Pardon me. This is a motor nerve that is going to control. In this case, if you follow where these axons are going, right, it's going to go this way and control the iris, as well as some of the muscles that move the eye in the orbit. Okay, so oculomotor, moving the eye, controlling the iris, which of course is going to control how big the pupil is. So pupillary response there, oculomotor. We're going to skip here 4 and 5 and 6, but suffice it to say that the 4 and 6 here, the trochlear and the abducens, are also innervating the muscles of the eye that are moving the eye. Trigeminal is number 5, is strictly sensory, and so detecting information from the face here. And again, trigeminal is not strictly sensory. It is a mixed one. My apologies. Mixed, so receiving information from the face, and then the motor part of that nerve is muscles that are involved with chewing, moving the jaw. We do want to have you know number 7 here, which is the facial nerve. And again, the sensory part of this facial nerve is touch around the eye, but then also taste. And so we see here that the sensory is involved with taste. And then the motor aspect of this will serve all of these muscles of the face, as well as stimulate some of the salivary glands to start secreting. So the motor part here, and this makes sense, right? That if you were tasting something, that then the response would be to salivate and help you to break down that food and get it moist, ready to swallow. So that is number 7, facial nerve. Number 8 down here is the vestibulocochlear nerve. So vestibulocochlear, this is sensory only. Sensory only here, and the vestibular part is dealing with balance, and then the cochlear part is dealing with hearing. So these neurons are going to be coming from the inner ear part here. So the cochlea is involved with hearing, and then the vestibular part is involved with balance. And so you have 2 branches there. This vestibular branch, again, balance, and then cochlear branch is the hearing. Let's go to number 9 here. So number 9 is glossopharyngeal. And glossopharyngeal, again, sensory part here is for taste. And then the motor part here is involved with swallowing a little bit. Some of the muscles involved with swallowing, that motor part. And lastly here, the vagus nerve. This is the one that doesn't really make sense given all the rest of them are sensory and motor response for stuff that's about the head, neck, face region. This vagus nerve is so called because a vagabond, somebody that wanders around. So this nerve here actually wanders away from the head neck area down the neck, and will then innervate the muscles of the organs of the thorax, right? Lungs and heart. And again, we have sensory and motor fibers there, right? As well as branching over here and innervating the muscles of the organs of the abdomen, stomach, and intestines. Again, so sensory and motor. So this one is a mixed nerve here. So now it's time to kind of pause and go back over those, review those, maybe make yourself a little table, a little flow chart, a little diagram, something there to review and practice. Here's another diagram, and just showing you here again that they are numbered sort of in the order in which they appear. So this is an inferior view of the brain here, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way through through 12 here, to the order in which they are arranged. So this table here summarizes, again, the cranial number and the name of it, the primary function, whether or not it is sensory or motor, and they make a distinction here between special sensory here and special sensory in terms of like the special senses: vision, hearing, smell, taste. And then the innervation. And innervation is where that nerve is going to or from. Okay, and again, we want to just have you know olfactory, optic, number 2, oculomotor, number 3, we'll worry about facial, number 7, vestibulocochlear, number 8, glossopharyngeal, number 9, and vagus, number 10. Okay, so you should be able to identify and describe here general structure of a nerve, what we mean by a mixed versus sensory versus motor nerve, identifying these cranial nerves, and again being able to come up with maybe a test for. So how would we test to see, how would a clinician test to see if those nerves are intact or if there's been some sort of damage to them, right? It's kind of a question that we can kind of talk about in class. Okay, thanks a lot and see you later.